Hi there, this is a video about a book called A Practitioner's Tool for Child Protection and the Assessment of Parents. So basically, this is a book that social workers would read when they are learning how to assess the safety of parents to be around their own children. These are the sort of factors that they are bearing in mind when they come round to your house. And a book like this would help them when they're studying for a university course or when they're writing assessments for use within the family court. Although that book was published in 2002, you can see from the reviews that people still find it very useful and up to date. And when you see the contents, I think many of you that might have been involved with social services will see why I still find it very relevant myself. Take this quote here. Excellent book for child protection work. I am a qualified social worker and I use when conducting my assessments. Well worth it. Really easy to read and adapt to when working in practice conducting assessments for court reports. So there are a number of these checkbox lists within the books so that a social worker could adapt these to use when they go around to somebody's house, so that they could either do them while they're interviewing a parent or later on. I think you'll be surprised at some of the factors that they take into account, because really, when you look at them, absolutely anybody could be considered a risk to their own child, unless you have led a very upper middle class, blameless life with the ideal parents. Then the facts are, and you'll see from this, that you could easily be considered a risk factor to your own children, very easily. So, first line here. Information about each of the adults in the home. And then they have this tick box that says yes, no, don't know. And the first thing that they want to consider is, was she or he a victim of abuse as a child? Because in social work, they consider that if you had an abusive childhood yourself, that makes you more likely to be abusive. Now, I don't really think that's very fair, and I would imagine that a number of people who are watching this video would not think it's very fair either, because sometimes if you've grown up in a bad home, that teaches you exactly how not to be a good parent. So really, you do the opposite, or you adapt your behaviour so that you're not having to discipline your child physically or whatever the bad behaviour is. One thing that may surprise people a lot: was he in care? So basically, you see, this is social services admitting that social care and growing up in care is a disadvantage. So you need to be asking yourself, really, is growing up in care damaging in some way? Are the majority of children that are removed really better staying with their parents unless they are in some kind of physical danger? And as we see, many children these days are removed for the threat of emotional abuse, where they consider it might happen, not that it's already happening, but if there is a risk. So if a child has grown up in care, and then when they are an adult, they have children, they are also considered a risk to their own child simply because they grew up in care. And the social worker might say this is because they had no appropriate model of a mother or father themselves, which tells you a lot about the standards of foster parents and children's homes. Go on to the next line. Did he have multiple carers as a child? That means basically, did they live with, I'm picturing the kind of child that is moved between grandparents, aunts and uncles, and so on. So that is supposed to be a risk. So the parent that experienced that is the risk, that they didn't have a particular parent to act as a good role model to them. Did she or he present with difficult behaviour as a child? So really, they are looking at the adult now and what their behaviour was like as a child. Is that fair? I don't know. I don't think it necessarily is. So somebody who was a difficult child and perhaps has settled down into adult life and really changed a lot, why should their childhood be taken into account? We'll see a number of questions in a similar vein here. Did she or he present difficult behaviour as an adolescent? So that's it. If you behaved badly and got yourself, well, they used to call it a borstal, I think it's Young Offenders Institute. If you grew up with a less than blameless track record, then you're more likely to be an unfit parent. Has previous professional involvement resolved any of these issues? So they're wanting to ask if you're a reformed character. But you see, even if you are, there's already a massive blot on your copybook because you had difficult behaviour. It's not really fair, is it? Is she or he under 18 years of age? Because being a young parent obviously makes you a bad parent. I'm being sarcastic about these things, by the way. I don't think being young necessarily makes you a bad parent. But as you are seeing, the facts are with this that basically they can make anybody look bad. That is my point. Does she or he present difficult behaviours? Have they had employment difficulties? Because obviously that affects your parenting. Is she or he unemployed? So obviously if you don't have a job or can't hold a job, then that affects your ability to raise a child properly. Perhaps they should be asking questions like, if the person is on benefits, do they manage their money well and manage to look after their children well? There always seems to be the assumption that if there have been difficulties with employment, that person will necessarily be a bad parent. So this kind of book, really, it's almost like the Tory prejudice child risk assessment. There's so many prejudices in this document, it's untrue. Has he or she a history of alcohol or drug abuse? Is the alcohol or drug abuse of long standing? So the trouble is with social workers that I've noted is that somebody who has a couple of glasses of wine a week is suddenly portrayed as a raging alcoholic. And of course, that's only a matter of the social worker's opinion. But these things tend to be very, very unfair. Has she or he had failed attempts to detoxify? So if you didn't get clean first time round, you're more of a risk. Are her or his friends into alcohol, or are they drug abusers? So even if you don't have any problems yourself, if I can certainly think of one of my friends who is alcoholic, and I have actually made sure that they're never in my house or home because it worries me too much what social services might think. I mean, they're not even in my life anymore, right? But that sort of thing absolutely terrifies me, because if they were to know something like that, they would make an absolute song and dance about it, because they routinely turn molehills into mountains. So I'm sure that my friend, who I've known since childhood, would have been considered a terrible risk, and therefore I would not be keeping my children safe, would I? Does this parent have a history of serious mental health problems? Has she or he a personality disorder? With personality disorders, they mean things like borderline personality disorder, narcissism, sociopathy, those kind of things. But I've actually known a case with one of my friends where, because she was not cooperative, this was a disabled woman that I knew, she was not cooperative with them 100%. And so they managed to get her diagnosed with not narcissistic personality disorder, but narcissistic tendencies. So, and that worked really well for them. It definitely cast her in a bad light, and she lost the care of her son. It wasn't the only thing that they used against her, but it was one. I don't know whether her lawyer actually pointed out that it wasn't a proper diagnosis, because in fact it pointed out tendencies. It didn't diagnose her with narcissistic personality at all. But you can see how these things are used once they're in a court. I've also experienced with social services where this sort of slur about mental health problems, if that applies to the parent that they want the child to be with, then it's not important. Or if that person is medicating it, well, they're compliant with their medicine, and so that's fine. But if this was to apply to the person that they want to remove the child from, suddenly it's a massive issue, even if the person's medicated. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as tick box, and things kind of get made up or exaggerated or twisted. Does she or he suffer from any degree of learning disability which could affect ability to care for children safely? Unfortunately, I've known many parents with even quite minor learning difficulties have children removed, and that's very, very sad, because even something like dyslexia can be called a learning disability, which is really unfair, isn't it? Has she or he a history of violent behaviour within relationships? Has he or she ever been convicted of an offence of violence? Now, to me, this seems a bit silly, because if you go to family court, say, for example, there's a private case taken by one parent or the other, unless that parent has actually been convicted of an offence of violence against a child, they will still be allowed to see their own child, even if, for example, it's a husband that has violently attacked his wife. Unless that man has ever violently attacked a child, he will still be allowed to see his child. Have they ever served a prison sentence for violence? Have they ever previously assaulted a child? Which really should be the only thing on this list, because actually, when it comes to being allowed visitation with a child, all the other things are not taken into account anyway, but it's on the social workers list. Right, I am going to stop there and make a second video that discusses the rest, because last time what happened is that the screen recorder didn't save it. I've tried several times to do this video, so I'll come back and do a number 2